I'll never forget the first time I saw something rise from the Black Sea. A shape too large and too silent to belong to any vessel I knew. The water seemed to darken around it, as if the sea itself was retreating. That was when the old engineer pulled me aside and whispered about the 11 rules that kept us alive on the rig. At first I laughed, until I realized these rules weren't superstition. They were warnings carved from death itself. I remember the night I broke just one of them, and what I saw staring back at me is something I still can't explain. When I first arrived on the rig, the foreman gave me a binder that looked more like a diary than any technical manual. Inside, the first page carried a warning, written in a shaking hand. Rule 1. Never step outside the rig after sunset, no matter what you hear. At first I thought it was just a scare tactic, the kind of superstition crews invented to haze newcomers. But that night, when the sun disappeared and the steel deck turned cold beneath my boots, I realized the rule was less about tradition and more about survival. The rig itself was nothing impressive. A rusted metal island anchored in one of the most unforgiving stretches of the Black Sea. It groaned under its own weight whenever the waves rose, and the pipes hummed as if the structure itself was breathing. I had spent years working on offshore platforms, but this one felt different. Even in daylight, I caught myself glancing at the horizon too often, feeling as if something might emerge at any moment. At night, though, the ocean stopped looking like water and started looking like a void. The crew warned me not to stay near the deck windows once the sun went down, but of course curiosity got the better of me. I stood by the glass, coffee in hand, staring into the blackness. That was when I noticed something unusual. The surface wasn't shifting in the way it should. Instead of rolling with the waves, the water outside lay unnervingly still, as if some vast shape beneath it was holding everything in place. My reflection trembled in the glass, and for a second, I thought another face was beside mine, longer, thinner, with eyes where they shouldn't be. I jerked back and nearly dropped my cup. The crewman named Boria chuckled from the corner of the mess hall, shaking his head. "First night?" he asked, and before I could answer, he added, "Stay away from the windows, and don't even think about opening the door. Out there, the sea listens." He tapped the binder that still lay on the table in front of me, then walked away as if he had said enough. His casual tone only made my chest tighten, because I realized he wasn't joking. The evening deepened into full night, and the rig's lights flickered against the surrounding dark. A humming noise filled the hallways, not from the machinery, but from somewhere outside, low and almost melodic. It was like hearing a choir buried beneath the water, voices stretched thin and muffled. My instincts told me to open the door, to listen closer, because the sound wasn't threatening, it was inviting. My hand hovered near the latch when the foreman appeared behind me, his voice sharp enough to cut through my trance. "Don't be stupid, kid. You step out there, you won't come back." I asked him what he meant, but he only frowned and said, "You'll see. Or maybe you won't, if you've got any sense." His words didn't explain much, but his eyes did, hard and tired, like someone who had seen too many rookies test their luck. He ordered me to bed, but sleep was impossible. The voices outside rose and fell, threading through my dreams, like they were whispering my name. I woke more than once with my hand stretched toward the door, fingers aching as if I had been sleepwalking. By the third night, I had convinced myself that it was all in my head, some mixture of fatigue and suggestion. That's when I heard knocking from outside the steel walls. It wasn't frantic or violent, just measured, as though someone was asking politely to come in. My pulse spiked, but at the same time, an odd calmness swept through me. I told myself it could be a loose cable, a chain brushing the hull, but the rhythm was too precise. When the knock came again, I thought I heard it echo in my chest, like my heartbeat had synced with it. I almost broke the rule then. My boots were already on, my jacket half sipped, when Boria caught me. He slammed the door shut before I even touched the handle, and shoved me back against the wall. His breath reeked of stale tobacco, but his eyes were sharp with fear. "Don't you get it?" he hissed. "They don't knock for you, they knock to see if you'll answer." He didn't say who they were, and I didn't ask. The way his voice shook told me the answer would be worse than the question. That night, none of us slept. The knocking turned to scraping, faint but deliberate, tracing along the outer shell of the rig. Everyone tried to act normal, playing cards, smoking, anything to drown the sound, but we all flinched whenever it grew louder. Around midnight, the scraping stopped, and silence fell so suddenly it made my ears ring. We sat frozen, waiting for the next noise, when the radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was thin and distorted, calling my name in perfect clarity. I knew no one outside the rig should even have known I was here. The only people aware of my assignment were in the mess hall with me. My mouth went dry as I reached for the receiver, but the foreman slammed his hand over it before I could respond. His expression was fierce, more desperate than angry. "It's not for you," he said. "It's never for you." He yanked the cord from the wall and tossed the radio aside, but the voice still echoed faintly in the steel beams above us. I wanted answers, but the crew had closed off by then, speaking in hushed tones, avoiding my questions. They had lived with this long enough to know that curiosity was more dangerous than ignorance. The silence outside stretched on until dawn, when the first light of morning painted the sea in dull silver. The change was immediate. The voices vanished, the pressure in my chest lifted, and the ocean looked like water again, instead of a mouth waiting to swallow us whole. Everyone exhaled at once, though no one said a word. That morning, I walked the deck for the first time since sunset, feeling the metal warm beneath my boots as the sun climbed higher. I tried to imagine what would have happened if I had stepped out during the night. The thought made me dizzy, as if my body already knew the answer, even if my mind refused to. All I had was Borea's warning that they didn't knock for me, but to see if I'd answer. Whoever they were, they knew I was here now. Later, while checking the generators, I noticed something that froze me in place. On the inside of the steel door I had almost opened, faint streaks trailed downward, like fingers dragged across condensation. Except the marks weren't made from inside. The steel was dented outward, as if something outside had been pressing to get in. I ran my hand over the ridges, and the metal felt warmer than the rest of the wall, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. That was when I realized the danger wasn't just outside the rig. Somehow, in my hesitation, I might have already let something in. The second warning in that battered binder felt more absurd than the first at the time. Rule 2. If you hear your name whispered after dark, never respond. I remember shaking my head when I read it, thinking someone had gone too far with ghost stories. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed how often silence on the rig wasn't really silence. At night, the air seemed to carry voices too faint to make sense of, until suddenly one of them would sharpen into something familiar, something that sounded like me. The first time it happened, I was on maintenance duty, checking gauges in the compressor room long past midnight. The hum of the machines filled my ears, steady and predictable, until a softer tone threaded through, curling just beneath the noise. It was so faint, I thought I imagined it, until I heard the whisper again. Clearer this time. It was my name, carried with such precision that it felt like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, wrench in hand, but the room was empty, except for shadows and the faint dripping of condensation. I told myself it had been a trick of the machinery, a pattern my brain had mistaken for speech. But as I bent back to my work, the whisper came again, sliding into my ear as though it had bypassed the air entirely. This time, it stretched my name into 2 syllables, drawn out like someone savoring the sound. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me, and nearly collided with the foreman in the hall. He didn't even need to ask. One look at my face, and he knew. His jaw tightened, and all he said was, "Good thing you didn't answer." I pressed him for details, but he refused to explain, only muttering that the sea had ways of testing people. That phrase stuck with me because it didn't sound like metaphor, it sounded like experience. The crew avoided eye contact when I brought it up at breakfast the next morning, but their silence told me more than words. Each of them had heard it before. Some had resisted. Others, well, the empty bunks spoke for themselves. The whispers didn't stop after that night. If anything, they grew bolder, as though sensing my awareness. Sometimes I'd hear my name drifting through the vents, soft and sweet like the voice of a loved one. Other times it came low and harsh, more like a growl than speech. What unsettled me most wasn't the variety, it was the accuracy. No matter the tone, it always pronounced my name exactly right, with the faint accent I'd grown up with back home. Not even my crewmates said it like that. On the fifth night, something new happened. I was lying in my bunk, half asleep, when the whisper came not from the hall or the vents, but directly beside my ear. It was so close that I felt warmth against my skin, as though breath had brushed across me. My body locked in place, heart hammering, but the whisper was patient. It repeated my name again and again, each time softer, coaxing, waiting for me to slip and answer. I clenched my teeth and stayed silent, though the effort left me shaking. When I finally dared to turn, the space beside me was empty, but the pillow was indented, as if someone had been lying there. I nearly broke down that morning, telling Borya everything over coffee. His response chilled me more than the whisper itself. "They're learning you," he said. "That's what they do. They start with your name, because that's the part of you they can reach first." I asked him what would happen if I answered, but he wouldn't say. Instead, he stared at the floor and muttered, "You won't be you anymore, that's all." The way his voice cracked told me it wasn't speculation, it was memory. By then, I started carrying earplugs during my night shifts, stuffing them in whenever the rig quieted enough for whispers to slip through. But earplugs only muted the outside world. They did nothing for the sounds that seemed to bypass hearing altogether. Some nights, I'd feel the whisper directly in my skull, bypassing my ears entirely, vibrating in the space behind my eyes. No barrier could protect against that. The crew noticed me flinch and twitch whenever it happened, but they didn't laugh or tease. They just gave me looks of grim recognition, as if ticking off the stages of a process they all knew too well. One evening, during a storm that rattled the entire rig, the whispers changed. Instead of just my name, I heard a phrase, "Come and see." It repeated over and over, almost lost in the howl of the wind, but clear enough to chill me to the bone. I pressed my hands over my ears, though I knew it wouldn't help. For the first time, the whisper wasn't just trying to get my attention, it was giving me an invitation. I don't know how long I sat frozen like that, rocking in the corner of the mess hall, until the storm died and silence returned. The next day, one of the newer mechanics was gone. His bunk lay untouched, his tools neatly stacked, but no one had seen him since his night shift. No alarms had sounded, no doors had been opened, at least not according to the logs. The crew didn't search, they didn't even speak of him. The foreman crossed his name off the roster with a grimace, and that was it. When I demanded an explanation, Borya simply muttered, answered the wrong call, and walked away. The way the others avoided my gaze told me they all agreed. Sleep became nearly impossible after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the phantom sensation of breath at my ear, the whisper curling closer, waiting for me to slip. Sometimes it mimicked voices I knew, my mother, an old friend, even my own voice echoing back at me. Each imitation was flawless, right down to inflections, only I would recognize. That was what terrified me most. Whatever whispered wasn't guessing. It was reaching into my memories, pulling out pieces of me, and using them against me. The worst night came when I almost answered without realizing it. I woke with my lips moving, the first syllable of my name on my tongue. My throat burned as if something had tried to drag the word out of me while I slept. I slammed my fist against the wall until the pain shocked me awake, terrified of what might have happened if I'd spoken the full word. I didn't tell the others. Some part of me feared that even acknowledging it aloud might count as a response. From then on, I kept a small mirror by my bunk. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof that I was still me. Each morning, I'd stare at my reflection, searching for signs of change. Some days I swore my features looked slightly off, like the lines of my face didn't quite belong to me. Once I thought I saw my reflection move a half-second too late, lips curling into a smile I hadn't made. I smashed that mirror the next night, but shards of glass scattered under my bed still showed fragments of me, all with that same delayed grin. I know now that the whispers don't just want attention, they want recognition. They want acknowledgement that they exist, that they have your focus, and the moment you give it to them, you let them inside. That's what happened to the mechanic. That's what almost happened to me. And yet with each night, the temptation grows sharper, the voice smoother, the silence heavier. Last night though, something changed again. Instead of coaxing me, the whisper turned angry, almost desperate. It repeated my name faster, sharper, until it felt like the air itself was vibrating with the sound. I pressed my hands to my ears and screamed, but it didn't stop, and then, just as suddenly as it began, it fell silent. The absence of sound was worse than the whisper itself, as though the sea was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. This morning, when I checked the outer deck, I found footprints leading to the door I had nearly opened days ago. They weren't ours. We hadn't set foot outside since before the storm. The prints were long, uneven, and wet, trailing from the edge of the rig, straight to my cabin door. And the disturbing part wasn't just that they stopped there, it was that they pointed inward. The third warning in that binder seemed simple enough, but it unnerved me more than the rest. Rule 3. Never look directly at the water when it goes still. The sea was always moving, currents shifting, waves breaking, winds disturbing its surface, so the idea of complete stillness sounded impossible. Yet, when I stepped onto the deck one gray afternoon, I noticed it. The black sea lay flat as glass, stretching outward without the slightest ripple, as though time itself had frozen. Something about that silence pressed against my chest, pulling my eyes toward the surface, daring me to look longer than I should. I forced myself to turn away, pretending to check the rigging, but the calm water radiated behind me like a presence. Every instinct screamed that something was watching, waiting for me to break. Barya appeared at my side then, his face pale and drawn. He muttered without looking at me, "Keep your eyes up. Don't give it the satisfaction." His words rattled me more than the sight of the still sea. He spoke as if the ocean itself were a predator, crouched and patient, ready to pounce if acknowledged. I lasted less than a minute before curiosity gnawed at me. My gaze slid down, almost involuntarily, and the stillness swallowed my vision. The surface didn't just reflect the sky, it reflected me, sharper than any mirror. My face stared back, but there was no movement in it. My mouth didn't part, my eyes didn't blink. The reflection was frozen, a waxen mask of myself, and the longer I stared, the more I noticed slight differences. The reflection's pupils dilated while mine did not, and its lips twitched upward into the faintest of smiles. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs, and the moment I broke eye contact, the water rippled again, shattering the image into harmless fragments. Barya grabbed my arm, his fingers digging deep. "You saw it, didn't you?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that chilled me. I asked him what it was, but he only shook his head. Not what, who. The way he said it left me with no comfort at all. It wasn't the sea I had looked into. It was something inside it. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the image in my mind. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the reflection's smile. It hadn't been threatening. It had been knowing, like someone recognizing an old friend. I didn't dare tell the others, but I saw the suspicion in their eyes during breakfast. They knew I had broken the rule. The unspoken truth on this rig was that once you slipped, once you gave the sea even a glance, it didn't forget. 2 days later, the water stilled again. This time, the entire crew froze mid-task, heads snapping upward like animals catching a scent. No one spoke, no one moved, except to deliberately look away from the ocean. I mimicked them, but my skin prickled as I felt that pull again, that unseen tug trying to tilt my head downward. I heard faint splashes in the distance, though the water remained motionless. Then came a sound like wet fabric, sliding across metal, close, too close, and I knew something had reached the rig. The foreman ordered us all inside, sealing the doors as if against a storm. I pressed my ear to the steel, straining to hear. The sound of dripping water echoed along the deck, slow and deliberate, followed by heavy pauses, as if footsteps circled the rig. My throat tightened when the drip stopped right outside the door. The metal hummed with weight pressing against it, and for a heartbeat, I thought the door would cave inward. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure lifted. A minute later, when we dared to peek outside, the water was moving again, waves returning as though nothing had happened. That night, I asked the foreman directly what the stillness meant. He stared at me for a long time before answering. The sea is never calm. If it looks calm, it means something else is holding it down. Something stronger than the tide, stronger than the wind. And if you look at it, it looks back. His words sank like lead in my stomach, because I realized I hadn't just looked, I had been seen. The reflection's smile returned in my memory, and I knew it hadn't been chance, it had been recognition. Sleep offered no escape. In my dreams, the still water stretched endlessly, my reflection standing on its surface like a twin. It beckoned me forward, arms outstretched, mouth moving though no sound reached me. Each time I woke drenched in sweat, but the echo of its smile followed me into the day. I started catching glimpses in unexpected places. A faint grin in the dark window of the control room, a pair of dilated pupils staring from the condensation on a pipe. I blinked, and the images vanished, but they left my pulse racing. The crew kept their distance, whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. I caught words like marked and seen. Even Barya avoided my gaze now, though once he muttered under his breath, "It knows your face." I wanted to demand answers, but a part of me feared speaking the reflection into reality, as if acknowledgement might give it strength. Instead, I buried myself in work, but no amount of distraction erased the awareness of eyes watching from below. One evening, while checking pressure gauges near the deck, I felt the air shift. The wind dropped, the waves stilled, and that oppressive silence settled once again. I froze, fighting the urge to look, but curiosity clawed at me. My hands shook, sweat dripping down my back, and I almost gave in, until I heard a soft sound. Not a whisper this time, but laughter. It came from below the deck, muffled but distinct, echoing upward through the steel. My name didn't follow, but I knew who the laughter belonged to. It was my reflection's. I bolted inside, slamming the hatch behind me, but the laughter stayed lodged in my head, circling like a memory that wasn't mine. That night, I didn't dare sleep. I sat upright in my bunk, staring into the darkness, until I saw it again. Not outside, not in a dream, right there in the glass panel of my cabin window. My reflection was smiling, lips parting as though it were about to speak. But the water outside the window wasn't still. The sea was moving, restless and alive, yet the reflection remained frozen, eyes fixed directly on me. I should have known what was coming the moment I saw that frozen grin in the window, but the binder's warning spelled it out in plain words. Rule 4. If you see your reflection move on its own, leave the room immediately. At first, I didn't connect the dots, thinking the rule belonged to some hypothetical nightmare I'd never face. But staring into that glass panel, seeing my reflection grin while I sat paralyzed, I realized this rule had been written for moments exactly like this, and I had already failed to follow it. The reflection didn't mimic me anymore. Its lips curled upward, while mine trembled in horror. Its eyes glistened with wetness, though mine were dry. Slowly its hand lifted, pressing against the glass as if it wanted to push through. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to flee, to obey the rule, but my body betrayed me, rooted to the spot as though the reflection's stare pinned me in place. The air thickened in my lungs, and for a moment, I thought my chest might collapse under the pressure. When I finally broke free, it was only because Borya burst into my cabin. His shout cut through the spell, and I stumbled backward, crashing into the bunk. He didn't hesitate. He yanked the curtain shut, blocking the window completely, and then shoved me toward the door. "Never stay when it does that," he growled, his voice shaking. "You let it watch too long, and it'll take more than just your smile." His words left me trembling worse than before. What exactly had almost been taken? We spent the rest of the night in the mess hall, the others pretending to play cards while their eyes flicked nervously to me. No one said it aloud, but I knew they all thought the same thing. I had been marked again, first by looking into still water, and now by watching my reflection move. My mind spun with questions, but no answers came, only dread. What did it mean to be marked twice? And how many chances did the rules give before the sea claimed you entirely? Sleep became impossible after that night. I covered every reflective surface in my cabin, with cloth, mirrors, windows, even the metal paneling polished to a dull shine. But avoidance didn't mean safety. The reflection found new ways to appear. Once, while tightening a valve in the compressor room, I saw it in the grease-slick surface of a wrench. Its grin was there, faint but unmistakable. Another time, in the coffee pot's sheen, it blinked half a second after I did. Each sighting left me breathless, struggling to resist the urge to smash whatever surface had betrayed me. The binder's warning echoed constantly in my head, "Leave immediately." But leaving wasn't always possible. How could I run from a reflection when it appeared in every surface on the rig? The walls, the tools, the water pooling near drains. All of it could betray me at any moment. The crew noticed my paranoia, though they didn't mock me. They'd all been there once, haunted by their own reflections. What terrified me was realizing most of them had scars, burns, cuts, missing nails, marks of desperate attempts to destroy mirrors or glass, before something worse looked back. One evening, the foreman sat across from me, his expression hard but weary. "You're being tested," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "It wants to know how much of yourself you'll give up before you break." I asked him what happened if I failed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he slid his mug aside, revealing faint scratches carved into the table beneath. My name, dozens of times etched deep, like someone or something had been practicing. My stomach turned cold, and I couldn't finish my coffee. That night, I dreamed of the reflection again, but this time it didn't just mimic or grin. It spoke. Its lips formed words in silence, repeating the same phrase until I woke, sweating and shaking. Though no sound carried, I knew exactly what it had mouthed. "Switch with me." I refused to close my eyes again, but exhaustion eventually dragged me back under. When I woke, I found condensation on the inside of my cabin window, traced into the same words I had seen in my dream. I left the room immediately, heart pounding, and spent the next day working non-stop to avoid being alone. But reflections don't need privacy. They only need sight. While carrying a toolbox across the deck, I glanced down at a puddle of rainwater pooled near the railing. My reflection stared back up, grinning wider than ever, but this time its mouth moved audibly in my head. Soon, I nearly dropped the box overboard, stumbling back and drew the attention of half the crew. They didn't ask what I saw, they already knew. That evening, I begged Borya to tell me what happens when someone doesn't obey the rule. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, his voice breaking as he finally answered. "They stop being reflections. They step through." I laughed, a desperate hollow sound, insisting that wasn't possible. But Boria only shook his head. Tell that to the empty bunks. His words silenced me more effectively than any explanation could. The thought of waking one day to find my reflection gone, because it wasn't behind the glass anymore, haunted me worse than the whispers. By the end of the week, I was a wreck, jumping at shadows, avoiding surfaces, terrified of catching myself in anything reflective. The crew avoided me now, muttering about how long I had left. Even the foreman's patience wore thin, but I couldn't escape the inevitable. One night, when the sea stilled outside and the rig fell silent, I caught sight of movement in the black window of the control room. My reflection leaned closer, grinning, lips forming words I didn't want to read. I turned away instantly, but not fast enough. When I glanced back, it was gone, yet the condensation on the glass carried the outline of my hand, pressed from the inside. The binder's warning screamed in my mind, "Leave immediately." But how could I leave a room when the reflection had already crossed the glass? I had thought reflections were the worst thing this place could throw at me, but the binder reminded me otherwise. The fifth warning read clearly, Rule 5. Never stay on deck when the foghorn blows without wind. At first it made little sense. Why would the foghorn even sound unless a storm or mist rolled in? But the crew's faces told me it wasn't about weather. It was about something else entirely. Something the sea itself signaled with that mournful cry. The night it happened, the air was still. The sea stretched like black glass, and not a breath of wind stirred. Yet from somewhere below the rig came that low, drawn-out blast, vibrating through the steel beneath my boots. The horn wasn't supposed to sound unless triggered manually, but no one was near the control panel. My stomach dropped as realization set in. This was the signal the binder had warned about. My instincts screamed at me to leave the deck, but curiosity held me there for one terrible moment too long. The sound was different from any foghorn I had heard before. It was deeper, almost like a living thing exhaling through the metal, and it carried a resonance that rattled my teeth. My chest tightened with each vibration, as though something beneath the water was calling out to me specifically. Around me the deck seemed to shift, the shadows lengthening unnaturally, stretching toward the railing as if pulled by unseen hands. I staggered backward, my body torn between fleeing and staring over the edge to see what waited below. Boria grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and yanked me toward the hatch. "Move," he barked, terror etched across his face. I'd never seen him like that. No anger, no frustration, just raw fear. He didn't stop until we were 3 flights down. The door slammed shut behind us. My ears still rang with the echo of the horn, my bones humming with its unnatural call. "What happens if you stay?" I demanded, but Boria only shook his head violently. "Don't ask. Don't ever ask." His silence said more than words ever could. That night, sleep refused to come. The memory of that sound haunted me, replaying again and again. I dreamed of the sea inhaling and exhaling, the entire body of water alive, and each breath stirring something vast below. When I woke, the walls of my cabin still seemed to vibrate faintly, though no one else seemed to hear it. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but deep down I knew the Black Sea wasn't done with me. It was only beginning to call. 2 days later, the horn sounded again. This time, I was in the mess hall with the crew, the faint tremor rolling up through the floor. Everyone froze, spoons halfway to their mouths, cards abandoned mid-game. No one spoke. Then, in perfect unison, every man stood and walked calmly, but quickly below deck, deeper into the rig. The silence was suffocating. I followed, my heart pounding, realizing this was ritual for them, a rehearsed drill for survival. Whatever the horn called, they'd been avoiding it for years. As the hours passed in cramped silence, I listened to the muffled groan of the sea outside. It wasn't just noise anymore. It felt like language, the drawn-out moan of the horn answered by distant, hollow reverberations below. I couldn't understand the words, but the cadence chilled me. It was a conversation, and the rig was only the stage for it. I wanted to ask Borya again what it meant, but the look in his eyes kept me silent. He was pale, trembling, muttering prayers in Russian under his breath. When the horn finally ceased, the air seemed to lighten, though no one cheered. Everyone returned to their duties in silence, as if pretending nothing had happened. I couldn't stand it. Later that night, I confronted the foreman, demanding answers. He sighed heavily, pulling out a flask and drinking deep before answering. "You think the foghorn is ours? It isn't. The sea has its own voice, and when it calls, it means something is rising." His words hollowed me out inside. Something rising. I didn't dare ask what. The next time, I wasn't as lucky. I was alone on deck, tightening a series of bolts near the cranes, when the horn wailed again. My tools clattered from my hands as the sound rolled through me, heavier this time, almost breaking my knees with its weight. I scrambled toward the hatch, but something stopped me, a ripple in the sea, spreading outward from directly below the rig. No wind, no vessel, just a circular disturbance that widened and widened. I couldn't look away, even though every nerve screamed to flee. From the depths, something massive shifted, its outline barely visible in the moonlight. I saw a ridge like a spine break the surface, then sink again, as though the sea itself was stretching. The horn moaned once more, and the water pulsed in rhythm with it, glowing faintly, as if lit from beneath. My chest seized, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then the glow brightened, revealing shapes just below the surface, limbs elongated and reaching upward, brushing against the hull of the rig. I staggered back, heart hammering, certain those limbs would break the surface entirely. Then the hatch behind me flew open, and Borya dragged me inside before I could see more. His fury was unmatched this time. He slammed me against the wall, shouting, "Do you want to be taken? Do you want to see what answers that call?" His spit hit my face, but all I could think of was the shapes. They hadn't been fish, they'd been too human, too deliberate. For the rest of the night, the horn echoed again and again, shaking the rig. None of us slept. The crew huddled in silence, the walls creaking as if straining against the weight of whatever pressed against them from outside. Each blast seemed to drag the world closer to collapse, and I prayed the steel would hold. By dawn, the sound stopped, leaving only a heavy silence that was somehow worse. The sea outside looked calm, but I knew better. Calm was only a mask. The foreman finally spoke the next day, his voice grim. "You lasted longer than most, seeing what you saw, but don't mistake survival for safety. The horn will blow again, and one day, you won't make it inside in time." He didn't have to add the rest. The day I failed, whatever surfaced would claim me, and maybe, just maybe, that was the true reason this rig had so many empty bunks. That night, I swore to myself I would never be caught on deck again when the horn sounded. But swearing is easy. When the sea wants you, it has a way of calling louder than your fear. And the next time the horn blew, I felt my legs move against my will, carrying me back toward the deck, as if something down there was pulling me closer. I thought the horn was the worst thing that could drag me back to the deck. But the binder's sixth warning echoed darker still. Rule 6. Never answer if someone calls your name from the water. At first, I couldn't imagine it happening. Voices rising from the waves like whispers in the dark. But the sea has a way of making the impossible sound ordinary. I didn't believe it until the first night I heard my mother's voice calling me across the black water. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the hum of the generators, but unmistakable. The tone, the lilt, even the way she dragged out my name when she was worried. It was all there, drifting over the waves. My chest tightened, my mind rebelling against the logic that she was thousands of miles away. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, maybe even madness from too many sleepless nights. But when I leaned closer to the railing, I swore I saw her outline in the mist below. Borya caught me before I could speak. His hand clamped over my mouth, his eyes wild with fear. "Don't answer," he hissed, dragging me back so hard my shoulders ached. "It's not her. It's never them." His desperation left no room for doubt. I realized then how close I had come to breaking the rule, how easily the sea could trick me. And yet, even as he pulled me below deck, I could still hear her voice calling, softer now, pleading, begging me not to leave her behind. That night, I didn't sleep. The voice returned again and again, shifting between familiar tones. My father, my childhood friend, even a girl I'd once loved. Each one called my name in just the right way, with just the right inflection, as though dredged directly from my memories. The cruelty of it twisted my insides. It wasn't random noise. It knew me, intimately, and it used my past like bait on a hook. The longer it went on, the more I feared what would happen if I slipped and answered. The others had their own stories. Around the mess hall table, voices low, the crew admitted they too had heard voices over the years. One man swore he'd heard his dead brother calling him. Another claimed he heard his child's laughter, though he had no children. The foreman cut us off sharply, slamming his mug down so hard coffee sloshed onto the table. "Don't discuss it. Don't even think about it. The more you dwell, the louder it gets." His eyes flicked to me knowingly. I realized then I'd already thought too much. Days passed without incident, but the silence didn't last. One evening, while checking the crane systems alone, I heard it again, this time clearer, sharper, as though someone stood directly beneath me on the water's surface. My own name, drawn out in a voice that matched mine perfectly. The sound froze my blood. It wasn't someone I knew anymore, it was me, my own voice echoing from the sea, calling myself down to meet it. That was worse than any trick it had played before. I bolted inside, heart pounding, but the voice followed, muffled through the walls, repeating my name in rhythm with my breaths. It didn't stop until I collapsed against the bunk, covering my ears. Even then, in the quiet of my cabin, I could almost feel it vibrating through the floor, a resonance matching the beat of the ocean outside. When I finally drifted into restless sleep, I dreamed of myself standing on the deck, leaning over the railing, answering. Only in the dream, I didn't stop at answering. I jumped. The next morning, Boria confronted me, his eyes bloodshot. "You heard it again," he said flatly. I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. He leaned closer, his voice low and trembling. "If you ever slip, if you ever speak back, you won't die, you'll just change. And whatever comes back on board won't be you anymore." His words hollowed me out in a way even the horn hadn't. Death I could accept, but becoming something else, something that wore my skin but wasn't me, that was worse. I tried everything to block the voices, earplugs, headphones, drowning the sound with music. Nothing worked. The sea didn't use volume, it used familiarity, tone, the exact rhythm of breath. You don't need to hear it clearly to recognize a loved one's voice. You just know that was the trick. And once you knew, it stuck inside your head, replaying endlessly, impossible to forget. It wasn't about hearing anymore, it was about memory. One night, when the crew gathered in the mess, the horn silent and the sea unnaturally calm, I heard it again. Not outside this time, but inside, whispered directly in my ear. My name, soft and pleading, spoken in my mother's voice. I froze, but none of the others reacted. They hadn't heard it. That was when I realized the voices didn't always come from the water. Sometimes, once they had you, they followed you inside. The next time it happened, I nearly broke. I was alone in the corridor when I heard my own voice again, calling from behind me, slow, drawn out, each syllable dripping with malice. I turned, but no one was there. Still, the voice persisted, closer now, like breath brushing against the back of my neck. I pressed my hands to my ears, biting back the urge to scream, terrified that any sound leaving my throat might count as an answer. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against the steel wall, trembling uncontrollably. When I told the foreman what happened, he only nodded grimly. "It's learning you. The longer you stay, the better it knows how to use your past, your fears, your own voice against you. That's why we don't last long here. Sooner or later, everyone answers. His honesty chilled me more than his silence ever could. The rules weren't about living forever. They were about delaying the inevitable. That night, the voice grew bolder. I woke to find condensation on the inside of my cabin window, words traced into the glass in handwriting identical to mine. "Talk to me." My knees buckled. I wanted to scream, to tear the cloth down and smash the window, but all I could do was back into the corner of the room, praying it wouldn't say my name again. But it did. Over and over, until my ears rang with it, until my jaw ached from clenching shut. I don't know how much longer I can resist. Every call grows harder to ignore, every whisper more intimate, more convincing. And tonight, as I sit here writing this, the sea outside is calm again. Too calm. I can hear my name rising once more, this time in unison. Dozens of voices layered together, family, friends, strangers, even myself, all begging me to answer, just once. And I don't know how much longer I can keep my mouth shut. The seventh warning always struck me as absurd, until the night it came true. Rule 7. If a seagull lands on the rig at night, don't look directly at it. By then I had learned better than to dismiss anything written in that cursed binder. But still I thought, what harm could a bird possibly do compared to the voices in the horn? I didn't realize until too late that nothing here was ever what it seemed. Not even something as ordinary as a gull. It began with the sound of wings flapping above the mess hall roof. The crew went silent immediately, spoons clattering against bowls, eyes flicking upward. No one moved. I felt the tension ripple through the room, and before I could ask what was wrong, Boria pressed a finger to his lips, his knuckles white. Then I heard it, soft footsteps on the metal deck, too heavy for a bird, too deliberate. My blood ran cold as realization dawned. Whatever had landed, it wasn't just a gull. I made the mistake of glancing toward the porthole, and Boria slammed his hand over my eyes. "Don't," he whispered harshly. "Never look." I froze under his grip, hearing the scrape of talons or claws, moving slowly outside. Each step rang hollow, echoing too loudly in the night air. The thing circled, pausing near the door, and for a moment I swore I heard breathing. Not the ragged exhale of an animal, but the steady, measured rhythm of something waiting, listening. We sat in silence for nearly an hour, the only sound the occasional shuffle of movement above us. My muscles ached, my lungs screamed for release, but no one dared speak. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sound of wings beat against the air again, fading into the night sky. Slowly, the crew relaxed, exhaling collectively, though no one celebrated. Their faces stayed pale, haunted, as though the danger hadn't truly passed. I asked what it had been, but they refused to answer. Only the foreman muttered under his breath, "It's never really a gull." Sleep was impossible after that. My curiosity gnawed at me worse than fear, replaying the sound of its claws pacing overhead. I needed to know. Days passed with no sign of the gull again, but the thought of it lingered like a splinter in my mind. The rules didn't lie, they never lied, which meant that whatever waited in the guise of a bird was real, and it had been just inches above me, testing my willpower. The next encounter came a week later. I was on night watch with another engineer, when the sound of wings cut through the silence. He went rigid instantly, muttering prayers under his breath. My heart sank. The gull had returned. This time, it landed directly on the railing near us, its pale feathers gleaming in the moonlight. I forced myself to stare at the floor, my pulse racing, though every instinct screamed to look. The bird shuffled closer, its talons scraping the metal, and I felt the weight of its gaze burning into me. Then it spoke, not in words exactly, but in a sound that mimicked speech, twisting into something almost human. It croaked my name, warped and distorted, but undeniably mine. My knees weakened, my breath caught in my throat. The other engineers shook violently beside me, whispering, "Don't look, don't look," the gull called again. Louder this time, the syllables bending unnaturally, as if trying to force its beak around human language. My curiosity clawed at me like fire, but terror held me still. The bird eventually flew off, leaving us shaking and drenched in sweat. My companion refused to speak of it afterward, his face gaunt, his eyes distant. That night, I asked Boria again what happens if someone looks. He didn't answer with words. He only rolled up his sleeve to show me a jagged scar running up his arm, as though something had torn straight through his flesh. He pulled the fabric back down before I could ask more, but his silence told me enough. He had looked once, and he had survived, but only barely. From then on, the gull became a constant threat. Some nights it came and went quickly, its claws scratching across the deck like an impatient predator. Other nights, it lingered for hours, circling the rig, wings brushing against steel, its weight shifting as it landed on different parts of the structure. The binder's warning haunted me each time, reminding me that one slip, one curious glance, would be enough to undo me. But resisting curiosity is harder than resisting fear, and the gull knew it. The worst night came when I was alone in the control room, the others asleep below deck. I heard the wings again, then the scrape of talons against the window just inches from my face. My body froze, but my eyes betrayed me, darting upward instinctively. I caught only the faintest glimpse, white feathers, a glint of something wet and glistening beneath its wings, before I wrenched my gaze away. My chest heaved, my skin clammy, as the sound of my own voice echoed back through the glass. The gull was speaking, perfectly mimicking me, word for word, repeating what I had whispered to myself minutes earlier. It stayed there for what felt like hours, my own voice taunting me, replaying my fears, my doubts, even my thoughts. When it finally flew off, I collapsed against the console, shaking uncontrollably. I realized then that it didn't just mimic sound, it mimicked memory. It had pulled words from inside my head, spilling them out in my own voice, and if it could do that without me looking, I couldn't begin to imagine what it could do if I gave it my full attention. Now every time the wings beat against the deck, I feel myself slipping closer to disobedience. The gull doesn't just wait for you to break, it wears you down, night after night, until your willpower crumbles. And tonight, as I sit here with the porthole covered, I can hear it again, tapping softly against the glass, its voice whispering in perfect unison with my own thoughts. The problem is, I'm starting to wonder if I'm really resisting it anymore, or if I'm already looking without realizing it. The binder's 8th command seemed harmless compared to the others. Rule 8, never touch anything that washes up on deck. At first I thought it was simple hygiene, avoid rusted metal, oil-stained debris, or dead fish dragged in by storms. But like every rule before it, the truth proved far more sinister. When the sea decides to give you something, it isn't a gift, it's bait. The first time it happened, a storm had passed, leaving the rig slick with rain and seawater. I was on cleanup duty, pushing water toward the drains, when I saw it, an old leather-bound book resting against the railing. The cover looked swollen but intact, the pages faintly dry despite the storm. My hand twitched to grab it. In this place, any link to the outside world felt precious. But the memory of the rule burned in my mind, and I stopped inches short. Boria appeared behind me, his expression hardening the moment he saw it. Without a word, he pulled a rag from his pocket, wrapped it around the book, and hurled it back into the sea. "Never," he hissed. "No matter what it is, never." I asked him what would have happened if I touched it, but he only muttered, "You wouldn't be asking now." His words chilled me worse than the storm winds. Days later, it happened again. This time, a golden locket, its chain tangled around the drain. The metal gleamed as if polished that very morning. My breath caught when I realized it was the same locket my grandmother used to wear. I hadn't seen it in years, and yet there it was, gleaming under the deck lights. My fingers itched to pick it up, to prove it was real. But something deeper inside me recoiled, whispering that it wasn't mine anymore. I backed away, my hands trembling, and waited until another crewmate came by. He froze at the sight, his face pale. Without hesitation, he kicked it overboard. I demanded to know if he'd seen it too, if it had looked like something familiar to him. His silence was answer enough. Whatever the sea left behind, it tailored for each of us, a personal lure. It knew our memories, our attachments, our weaknesses, and it dressed its traps accordingly. The worst came one night when I was alone on the deck, keeping watch. I heard the faint clatter of metal sliding across steel. Turning, I saw a knife lying in the center of the platform. Not just any knife, my own. The one I'd lost weeks earlier during maintenance, when it had slipped from my tool belt and disappeared into the waves below. My chest tightened, my throat dry. I knew I hadn't imagined losing it, and yet here it was, waiting for me to take it back. I wanted to believe it was just coincidence, but deep down I knew better. The sea didn't return lost things. It created replicas, perfect down to the last detail, designed to lure us into breaking the rule. I forced myself to walk away, though each step felt heavier, as if invisible hands tried to drag me back toward the knife. When I finally made it inside, my hands shook so badly, I couldn't hold a pen. I knew then that resisting the temptation was only half the battle. The other half was surviving the craving it left behind. The crew had their own scars. One man, Yuri, once touched a pocket watch that had rolled across the deck during night shift. He swore it belonged to his father, lost years ago in a house fire. For a moment, nothing happened. He even showed it to us, its ticking loud and steady. But by morning, Yuri was gone. His bunk was neatly made, his boots still at the door. The watch sat on his pillow, its ticking louder than before, as if mocking us. No one spoke of him again. Another time, a crate washed up, small but heavy. No one dared touch it, but the sound from inside nearly drove us mad. Faint cries, muffled voices, sometimes laughter, sometimes screams. The foreman had to lash it to the crane and drop it back into the water. Even as it sank, the cries continued until the sea swallowed them whole. For days afterward, some swore they still heard faint echoes in the pipes, as if the crate had found its way into the rig itself. By now I no longer doubted the rule, but knowing the danger didn't make it easier. Each offering from the sea grew more personal, more cruel. A photograph of my family, dry. Despite the rain, a jacket I'd lost years ago, folded neatly near the hatch. Even a small wooden carving I'd made as a child, its edges worn just as I remembered. Every time I forced myself to look away, but each time it cut deeper, reminding me how easily I could break. The last test came during a night storm. Waves battered the rig, wind tearing at the railings, when something heavy thudded onto the deck. I knew I shouldn't look, but curiosity won. It was a duffel bag, waterlogged but intact. My chest clenched when I recognized it. It was mine. The same bag I'd left behind at home, filled with my clothes, my wallet, even the worn-out notebook I used for sketches. The zipper hung half open, inviting me to check. I swore I could see my own handwriting on the pages inside. I stood frozen, every muscle screaming to run, yet unable to move. The storm howled, the sea surged, and the bag sat there, waiting patiently. I thought of Borya's scar, of Yuri's empty bunk, of the binder's warnings. But louder than all of that was the voice inside my head whispering, "What if it's really yours? What if the sea is just giving it back?" I didn't touch it. I couldn't, but I also couldn't bring myself to throw it overboard. I left it there, trembling, until the storm finally dragged it back into the waves on its own. When I returned to my cabin, my real duffel bag was gone, vanished without a trace. That was when I realized the sea wasn't just tempting us, it was trading, taking pieces of us in exchange for the things it offered. and the next time something washed up, I wasn't sure if I'd even have anything left to give. When I first read it in the binder, I smirked at the absurdity. Rule 9. Never respond to a voice calling your name from the water. At the time, it sounded like nothing more than folklore, like the sea was a mischievous trickster trying to lure us overboard with whispers. But by the time I experienced it for myself, I knew this wasn't superstition. It was the cruelest trick the Black Sea had to offer, because the voices didn't sound like strangers. They sounded like people you couldn't bear to ignore. It began one evening after another. Brutal storm. The deck was slick. The railings groaned with every sway, and exhaustion had wrapped around my body like a lead blanket. I was heading back to my cabin when I froze. A voice rose from the darkness below, carried on the waves, soft and broken. It was my mother's. She was calling my name, just as she had when I was a boy who had wandered too far into the fields. The sound was so achingly real that my knees nearly buckled. I stumbled toward the railing before snapping myself back with a jolt. She couldn't be here. She had never even seen the Black Sea. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voice slipped through anyway, louder now, pleading, trembling, as though she were drowning. My name echoed between the waves, and with every cry, the urge to answer clawed deeper into me. For a moment, I whispered, "Mom," before biting my tongue hard enough to taste blood. That tiny slip nearly cost me. The waves surged violently below, as if something stirred at my hesitation. I forced myself to stagger backward, slamming the hatch shut behind me. I thought it would end there, but the voices never stopped. Once they found you, they followed you. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I heard my father's voice drifting through the thin walls. He called softly, telling me to open the window, to look at him. My father had been dead for years, but the voice was exact, tone, cadence, even the way he used to stretch my name when he was angry. I buried my head under the pillow, shaking, every fiber of me screaming to answer, but I didn't. I couldn't. Other crew weren't so strong. I'll never forget when Victor, a welder, broke the rule. He was on night watch when he heard his sister calling from below. We all woke to his shouts, the frantic pounding of boots on steel. By the time we reached the deck, it was too late. The sea was boiling, froth churning, but Victor was gone. No splash, no struggle, just absence. Days later, one of the new recruits swore he heard Victor calling his name from the waves. We dragged him away from the railing before he could lean too far over. The sea doesn't just take, it recycles. As time passed, the voices grew bolder. They no longer waited for storms. I'd hear them during maintenance, while checking gauges, even in the cafeteria when laughter was loudest. Sometimes they called sweetly, sometimes angrily, sometimes with desperate screams that scraped against my bones. Always someone I loved, always someone I couldn't ignore. I learned to grind my teeth, to hum under my breath, anything to drown them out. But every time I resisted, they seemed to learn more about me, more names, more memories, more vulnerabilities. One night, I heard a voice I never expected, my own. It came from the water, low and hollow, begging me to help. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat as I listened to myself cry out, my own accent, my own desperation echoing from below. The others didn't hear it, only me. I wanted to scream, to demand how that was possible, but I kept my mouth shut. If answering my mother could have dragged me into the depths, what would answering myself have done? Boria warned me once, his eyes haunted, that the voices don't just mimic, they evolve. First, they sound like loved ones, then they sound like you, and if you keep resisting, they start telling you things you shouldn't know, secrets you never confessed, mistakes you never admitted, regrets you tried to bury. The sea strips you bare until your silence is the only defense left. I didn't believe him fully until I heard my own voice whispering from below. You know this rig won't let you leave alive. The breaking point came during a maintenance shift. The fog was thick, swallowing the horizon, when I heard her. Lena, the woman I loved and lost years ago in an accident. She was sobbing, calling my name, begging me to answer. I dropped my wrench, my heart tearing itself apart, my throat aching with the urge to scream her name back. My hands clutched the railing, knuckles white, as her cries turned to laughter, low guttural laughter that didn't belong to her. I stumbled back, horror choking me, realizing it had never been her at all. Since then, I've kept my distance from the railings, my mouth shut tight, even when silence feels unbearable. But the voices have become relentless, finding cracks in my mind, tempting me when I'm weakest. Last night, as I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice again, softer this time, almost a whisper. She didn't call my name, she simply said, "Turn around," and the worst part, I almost did. The binder's warning felt strange at first. Rule 10. Never go near the water when it turns still. Out here, the Black Sea was never calm, even on clear nights. It rippled and shifted with unseen currents. But I soon learned that stillness on this rig didn't mean peace. It meant something had surfaced, something vast enough to quiet the entire sea. And when that happened, the ocean was no longer a body of water. It was a lid, sealing in something that wanted out. The first time I witnessed it, I thought it was beautiful. A sudden hush fell across the waves, the kind of silence you might expect in a painting. The sea reflected the sky like polished glass, every star above mirrored with haunting perfection below. For a fleeting moment, I forgot the rules, forgot the danger, and leaned closer to the railing just to marvel at it. That was when I noticed the reflections weren't matching. The stars above shimmered faintly, but the ones below flickered too quickly, as if blinking. That's when Borya yanked me back and hissed, "Never trust the calm." He told me stories then, his voice low. Men who had mistaken the stillness for safety, who had leaned too close, who had lowered buckets or nets into the glassy water. None of them lasted long. The sea didn't swallow them in a splash or a roar. It simply opened, like a mouth yawning wide, and pulled them down without a trace. The still water was a trap, a veil stretched tight over something waiting just beneath. And the longer it lasted, the closer that something came to the surface. I didn't want to believe him until it happened during my own shift. The rig shuddered slightly, the usual waves silenced in an instant. My breath caught as I peered over the edge. The surface stretched endlessly, motionless, so flat that even the wind seemed to die before touching it. I thought I saw my reflection at first, but then it moved on its own, a heartbeat slower than me, its mouth curving into a grin I didn't make. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The others had their own encounters. Once a mechanic named Sokol saw his child's face staring up at him from the still water. She had drowned years earlier, but there she was, smiling sweetly, her hands pressed against the surface as though it were glass. He reached out, tears streaming, and the deck lights flickered violently. By the time we rushed to stop him, his hand had already broken the surface. The water closed around him like quicksand. We never saw him again. Only the perfect calm remained, as if nothing had happened. Another night, the stillness lasted for hours. None of us slept, too afraid to close our eyes. The sea below seemed patient, watching, waiting. The silence became unbearable, pressing against our ears, making us hear things that weren't there. Soft knocks against the hull, the faint sound of breathing just beneath the steel. When the waves finally returned, we all let out shaky laughs of relief, though none of us truly believed we were safe. It wasn't relief, it was reprieve. As time passed, I began to sense the stillness before it even arrived. The air grew heavy, my skin prickled, and the rig's metal seemed to hum with unease. And when it came, I felt an almost magnetic pull to look into it, to lean over, to see what lay beneath. I think that's the real danger. It wasn't just physical, it was mental. The calm wanted you curious, wanted you close, wanted you to touch it. And once you did, there was no coming back. The worst stillness came not during a storm, but on the calmest day of the season. The sun had set, the deck was quiet, and suddenly the waves froze into a perfect mirror. I was alone on night watch when it happened, and against every shred of instinct, I stepped closer. My own face stared back at me from the surface. But it wasn't alone. Dozens of other faces crowded around mine. Some I knew, some I didn't. Crew members, strangers, even people long dead, all of them pressed together, their mouths moving silently, begging for release. I stumbled back, my breath ragged, but my reflection stayed. Even when I turned my head, it kept looking at me, its smile stretching wider. Then in one horrific instant, it lifted its hand. My reflection waved, slow and deliberate, while my real hands remained locked at my sides. My knees gave out, and I fell onto the steel, scrambling backward until the deck hatch slammed shut behind me. When I dared to return hours later, the water rippled once more, innocent as if nothing had happened. Since then, I've avoided the railings altogether whenever the sea quiets. But the stillness has grown more frequent, creeping closer to the rig, lasting longer each time. I fear the ocean isn't just showing us things, it's thinning the barrier between us and whatever lies beneath. And I can't shake the feeling that one night soon, the stillness won't end, that the sea will stay perfectly flat, forever, until the thing below finally decides to surface. The last warning in the binder was written darker than the others, as if the pen itself had dug deeper into the page. Rule 11. If you hear footsteps on the deck after midnight, do not open your door. It seemed simple enough, almost mundane compared to the horrors I'd seen. But by the time I understood its meaning, it had already burrowed into me. Midnight on the rig was never truly quiet, yet the footsteps were different, too slow, too patient, too heavy to belong to any man alive. The first time I heard them, I thought it was a crewmate. The clock had just tipped past 12, and I was lying awake, staring at the thin walls of my cabin, when the sound came measured steps across the steel, deliberate and unhurried. They didn't belong to boots or work shoes. There was a dragging weight behind them, a scrape that set my teeth on edge. My hand went to the door handle, automatically, ready to check, but a cold dread wrapped around me. Something inside whispered, "Don't." I forced myself to stay still, my breath shallow, as the footsteps stopped right outside my cabin. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I could feel something waiting on the other side, almost leaning into the door, almost listening. My pulse thudded so loudly, I thought it would give me away. I pressed my ear to the wall and swore I heard faint breathing, long and steady, nothing like the ragged rhythm of a man. For nearly an hour, I stayed frozen until the steps finally moved on. When morning came, I asked the others if anyone had been on night patrol. No one had. The log was clean, but I wasn't the only one who'd heard them. A mechanic admitted he'd been lured once, years ago, when the sound stopped outside his door. Against the rules, he cracked it open. He never finished telling the story. His voice broke, his hands trembling, and all he said was, "It wasn't one of us." He left the rig at the next port and never came back. The nights grew worse after that. Sometimes the footsteps circled my cabin slowly, tracing a perimeter as if testing my resolve. Other times, they darted quickly, stopping abruptly at my door, waiting. The sound became so real, I could almost picture the weight behind it. A figure tall and thin, dragging its legs, leaving wet marks that I never found in the morning. Once I thought I heard nails tapping softly against the metal, like fingers brushing across my doorframe. The urge to open it nearly broke me. What made it unbearable was the voices that began to accompany the steps. At first they were faint, almost murmurs beneath the sound of dragging feet. Then they grew clearer, familiar voices, ones I trusted. My mother calling me again, my father, even Lena. Each begged me to open the door, saying they were cold, that they needed me. My throat ached with the need to answer, but something in their tone was wrong, too flat, too rehearsed, like an echo wearing a mask. Boria once told me the rig had lost men this way. They thought it was a friend knocking, someone drunk, someone in trouble. They opened their doors, and by morning their bunks were empty, their belongings untouched, no struggle, no sound, just gone. He said sometimes, on quiet nights, you could still hear them pacing the deck, now part of whatever walked there. His scarred face hardened as he added, "The sea doesn't need to drown you, it just needs to be let in." The worst night came near the end of my shift rotation. I had been awake for hours, nerves frayed, when the footsteps began again. Slow at first, then faster, circling, stopping, circling again. My door handle rattled, soft but deliberate, as though someone was testing it. My blood turned to ice. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps against the metal, each one vibrating through my bones. I bit down hard on my fist, to keep from screaming. The knocking stopped, and silence stretched on. Then a whisper slipped through the crack of the door, my own voice. It begged me to open up, saying I couldn't hide forever, that I already knew what waited outside. Hearing myself speak words I hadn't said nearly shattered my mind. My hand hovered over the lock, trembling, ready to break the final rule. But then I remembered Boria's words, the binder, all the men who had vanished. I pulled my hand back and pressed it against my chest, forcing myself to stay still. The footsteps eventually faded, leaving me shaken and hollow, but they always return. Every night after midnight, I wait, praying the sound won't come, but it always does. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, always patient. I know one night I'll break, that curiosity or exhaustion will win. And when that happens, when I finally open the door, I'll see what no man should. And I know the sea will claim me, not with waves or storms, but with whatever has been walking above them all along. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.